The ambulance couldn't move. Its red and blue lights flashed across the rain-soaked canyon walls while 20 angry homeowners stood in the mud screaming at me like I'd just declared war on the whole county. The storm had knocked power out across Ridgeview Estates about an hour earlier, and now an elderly man was having chest pains somewhere inside the subdivision. The only problem? The only road into that neighborhood ended at the steel gate I'd locked 6 hours earlier. Patricia Thornwell stood at the front of the crowd in a cream-colored raincoat that probably cost more than my truck. Water rolled off her blonde hair while she pointed a shaking finger straight at my chest. "You can't do this," she screamed over the thunder. "This is a public access road." I didn't answer right away. That made her even madder. Here's something I've learned in 46 years on this earth. Loud people get nervous when quiet people don't react. Sheriff's Deputy Collins stepped between us, rain dripping off the brim of his hat. The poor guy looked like he wished he'd called in sick. "Mr. Jennings," he said carefully, "are you telling me this entire road belongs to you?" I reached into my jacket and handed him a thick folder sealed in clear county plastic. Certified copies, easement records, survey maps, property transfer documents going all the way back to 1958. The deputy opened the file under the ambulance headlights, and I watched his face slowly change. First confusion, then concern, then the kind of silence that makes everybody else uncomfortable. Patricia noticed it too. "Don't listen to him," she snapped. "He's trying to hold this community hostage because he lost a lawsuit." I finally looked at her. Calm, tired, completely done with her nonsense. "No, Patricia," I said. "I won the lawsuit." That shut up half the crowd instantly. The other half just looked confused. The rain kept hammering the steel gate behind me while the paramedics waited inside the ambulance, not saying a word. Deputy Collins flipped through another page. "These county records say Ridgeview's emergency easement expired in 1989. Patricia laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's impossible." The deputy looked up slowly. "Ma'am, did your HOA board know this road was private property?" Nobody spoke. You ever notice how fast confident people stop talking when paperwork shows up? Documentation has a funny way of making loud people quiet. Patricia stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. "Open the gate," she hissed. Right now, I could smell expensive perfume mixed with wet asphalt and panic. Big difference between confidence and panic. Most people can't tell until it's too late. "You sued me for 6 months," I said. "You called me a squatter in county court. Your lawyer told the judge I was interfering with community infrastructure." I nodded toward the steel gate. "So I removed my infrastructure from your community." Behind Patricia, one of the homeowners suddenly shouted, "Wait, are you saying we've been using this guy's road illegally?" Another voice yelled, "Patricia, what the hell is going on?" And there it was. The first crack. Small, but deep enough to spread. If you've ever dealt with somebody who thought they could bully you because they had more money, more friends, or louder lawyers, drop a comment below. I swear half this country has an HOA horror story now. Deputy Collins closed the folder carefully. "Mr. Jennings," he said, almost respectfully now. "Legally, nobody can force you to open this gate tonight." Patricia's face went pale. Not angry pale. Scared pale. That's when the county engineer standing near the ambulance finally spoke up for the first time all night. Quiet voice. Real nervous. "Patricia," he said, "I think we need to talk about Phase 2 permits." Her head snapped toward him so fast it looked painful. And right there, standing in the rain, while an entire subdivision realized they might be trapped on land connected by a road they didn't legally control, I finally understood how deep this thing really went. But let me back up. Because this whole mess started almost a year earlier, the day I bought 1,200 acres nobody else wanted. My father used to say that land only matters to people who have never had any. I did not understand what he meant when I was younger. Back then, the ranch just felt normal to me. 1,200 acres of rolling Wyoming hills, broken fences, muddy boots, cold mornings, and a gravel road that cut through the canyon like a scar. I grew up fixing cattle gates before school and pulling rusted nails out of old fence posts every summer. We were not rich, not even close, but my father loved that land like it was another member of the family. Every inch of it had a story. That old cottonwood tree near the creek? My grandfather planted it after coming home from Korea. The weathered barn with the sagging roof? My mother painted it red herself 30 years ago. The road everybody was screaming about during that storm? My great-grandfather carved the first version of it through solid rock with a tractor and pure stubbornness. That road existed before Ridgeview Estates, before the county lines changed, before Patricia Thornwell ever stepped foot in Wyoming wearing heels that sank into dirt every time she walked. My father, Dean Jennings, believed in paperwork the way some people believe in religion. The man kept every receipt, every survey, every county permit in metal filing cabinets older than I was. Growing up, I thought it was ridiculous. Then one day he looked at me over a cup of burnt black coffee and said something I never forgot. People do not steal land anymore, Levi. They steal access. At the time, I thought he sounded paranoid. Turns out the old man was about 20 years ahead of everybody else. After he died, I stayed away from the ranch for almost 11 months. Grief does strange things to a person. Some people cry. Some people drink. Me? I worked 70-hour weeks designing infrastructure projects in Denver while pretending I was too busy to deal with the silence waiting for me back home. Then one morning I got a call from a rancher named Walter Griggs who lived 2 properties over. He was 81 years old and sounded angry enough to chew through barbed wire. "Boy," he said, "you better get your butt back here before these subdivision people turn your daddy's canyon into a shopping mall." That got my attention. I drove up that same night in my old Ford truck with 2 duffel bags and enough gas station coffee to stop my heart. The second I crossed the county line, I knew something had changed. There were brand new luxury homes where open grazing fields used to be. White fences that looked decorative instead of useful. Fancy stone entrances with names like Silver Creek Preserve and Canyon View Estates. Every mailbox looked exactly the same. Every lawn looked fake. Then I saw Ridgeview. 200 houses packed together on the far side of my canyon. Beige walls, black roofs, tiny trees struggling in rocky soil. It looked like somebody copied a California suburb and dropped it in the middle of cattle country. The weird part, the only paved road leading into that entire subdivision crossed directly through my property. I remember slowing my truck down and staring at the entrance sign while dust rolled across the hood. Something felt off immediately. Engineers notice things. It is how my brain works. I noticed the drainage culverts were tied into my creek bed. I noticed utility lines crossing near the eastern fence. I noticed heavy truck tire marks cutting across sections of ranch land that absolutely did not belong to Ridgeview. Most important of all, I noticed a fresh county marker hammered into the ground 20 feet past where the legal easement should have ended. That was the first moment my stomach tightened. Somebody had moved that marker. Not by accident either. Somebody wanted that road to look permanent. Walter met me outside the old feed store the next morning wearing overalls and chewing tobacco. He pointed toward Ridgeview with disgust written all over his face. "Those HOA people think they own the whole county now," he muttered. "Started using your road 6 years ago during construction. Now they act like your ranch is public property." I asked him the question that changed everything. "Who gave them permission?" Walter laughed without humor. "That is the funny part. Nobody knows." Right then, standing beside that old feed store while cold Wyoming wind pushed dust across Main Street, I realized this was not some simple neighbor dispute. Somebody had built an entire community around a road they might not legally control. And people who gamble millions of dollars on land usually do not react calmly when somebody starts asking questions. The first time I met Patricia Thornwell, she was standing in the middle of my road like she owned the Rocky Mountains. I was driving back from the hardware store with fence supplies rattling in the truck bed when I rounded the canyon curve and nearly hit a golf cart parked sideways across the gravel. Not beside the road. Across it. Patricia stood there in oversized sunglasses and spotless white boots that had clearly never touched real dirt before. Beside her were 2 men in polo shirts holding clipboards and staring at my land like they were shopping for furniture. I rolled down the window slowly. "Can I help you?" Patricia smiled the way people smile when they think they are already in charge. "Actually," she said, "we were about to ask you the same thing." That was my first warning sign. Confident people ask questions. Entitled people ask questions like they already know the answer. One of the clipboard guys stepped forward. "We are surveying for the Ridgeview Phase 2 expansion." I looked past them toward the stakes hammered into the ground near my eastern pasture. Fresh orange tape fluttered in the wind. They had crossed almost 400 feet onto my ranch. "You are surveying the wrong property," I said. Patricia gave a little fake laugh. "Oh no, Mr. Jennings. According to county planning maps, This corridor services residential infrastructure. Corridor. That word stuck in my brain immediately. Developers love changing simple words into expensive words. Road becomes corridor. Creek becomes drainage feature. Ranch becomes undeveloped parcel. Makes stealing sound professional. I shut off the truck engine and climbed out slowly. The Wyoming wind pushed dust around our boots while cattle watched from the fence line. This is private property, I said calmly. You need permission before bringing crews out here. Patricia folded her arms. The Homeowners Association has maintained this road for years. Maintained? I asked. You mean driving on it? One of the clipboard men snorted, trying not to laugh. Patricia shot him a glare sharp enough to peel paint. Then she turned back to me with that same polished smile. Mr. Jennings, Ridgeview Estates contains 200 homes. Families depend on this access road every single day. School buses use it. Delivery trucks use it. Emergency services use it. She stepped closer. You would not want to interfere with that, would you? There it was. The first threat wrapped in fake politeness. People like Patricia never start with yelling. They start with pressure. Little reminders about how important they are. I looked down at the survey stakes again. Who approved this expansion? Patricia answered immediately. County Planning Commission. Too fast. Another warning sign. Honest people think before answering. Prepared people rehearse answers ahead of time. Interesting, I said, because I have not approved anybody crossing my eastern fence. One of the surveyors cleared his throat awkwardly. Actually, ma'am, technically we are beyond the recorded easement line. Patricia ignored him completely. Big mistake. Never ignore the quiet guy holding the measurements. She pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to me between perfectly manicured fingers. Patricia Thornwell, HOA President, Ridgeview Estates Community Association. Gold lettering. Expensive cardstock. The kind of card people order when they desperately want strangers to take them seriously. I think we got off on the wrong foot, she said smoothly. Perhaps we should discuss partnership opportunities instead of creating unnecessary conflict. Partnership opportunities. Another fancy phrase. Translation? She wanted my land. Or more specifically, she wanted control over the road crossing it. I could already feel it. You mean you want permanent access? Patricia smiled wider. See? We are communicating already. I leaned against the truck door and studied her for a second. My father used to say roads tell you who people really are. That smile twitched just a little. And what does this road tell you? She asked. That somebody built a very expensive neighborhood before checking who owned the front door. The silence after that was beautiful. One of the surveyors suddenly became very interested in his clipboard. The other slowly backed toward the golf cart. Patricia kept smiling, but her eyes changed. That warm neighborhood president act disappeared for about half a second. Underneath it was something colder. Calculating. Dangerous. Then she laughed again like none of it mattered. You seem confused, Mr. Jennings, she said. Ridgeview has legal counsel. I nodded. Good. You are probably going to need it. I got back into the truck and drove past them, but in the rearview mirror, I caught something important. Patricia was no longer looking at me. She was staring at the road itself. Not casually either. She looked nervous. And when somebody like Patricia Thornwell gets nervous about a road, it usually means the road is worth a whole lot more than anybody is admitting. 3 days after my little roadside conversation with Patricia Thornwell, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines outside my bedroom window. Not one truck either. 4 of them. I pulled on my boots and stepped onto the porch just as the sunrise hit the canyon. 2 landscaping trailers were parked beside my lower pasture fence, and a crew in neon safety vests was unloading equipment like they had been invited there. One guy was already spray painting utility marks directly across my grass. Another was hammering stakes beside the creek. I stood there for a second holding my coffee, trying to decide whether I was angry or impressed by the sheer level of audacity. Then I noticed the temporary construction sign zip-tied to my fence post. Ridgeview Estates Phase 2. Authorized access route. I actually laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because sometimes people become so arrogant they stop hiding what they are doing. One of the workers noticed me first. Morning, sir, he called casually. We are just prepping the service lane. No, I said, walking toward him slowly. You are trespassing. The guy blinked like nobody had ever used that word around him before. We got permits. For my land, I asked. He looked back toward the trucks immediately. That told me everything. Contractors know when something smells wrong. About 5 minutes later, Patricia's white Range Rover came bouncing down the gravel road, throwing dust everywhere. She stepped out wearing sunglasses, even though the sun was barely up. "Good morning, Levi," she said smoothly, like we were old friends meeting for brunch instead of standing in the middle of an illegal construction site. "You forgot to ask permission," I replied. Patricia smiled. "The county approved temporary expansion access yesterday afternoon." She held up a folder like it was a winning lottery ticket. "We are completely within our legal rights." I walked past her and looked at the paperwork. Temporary Utility Corridor Authorization. Signed by County Planning. But something important was missing. My signature. "Interesting," I said quietly. Patricia crossed her arms. "You really should stop treating this like some kind of personal battle. You put survey crews 400 feet onto private ranch land. For infrastructure improvements. Still private land." Her smile tightened. "Levi, do you honestly think one ranch owner gets to block housing development for 200 families? There it was again. The strategy. Make me sound selfish. Make her sound important. People like Patricia always hide behind words like community and progress. Makes it easier to ignore who actually owns what." I pointed toward the creek crossing where a bulldozer had already started clearing brush. "You are damaging protected runoff channels." Patricia gave a little shrug. "Environmental Review signed off on it." "Did they?" I asked. "Or did somebody just tell them this land belonged to Ridgeview?" For the first time, her expression flickered. Tiny, barely noticeable, but it was there. That question hit too close to something real. Before she could answer, another truck rolled through the gate, pulling a portable office trailer behind it. The driver clipped one of my cattle fences so hard the entire section bent sideways. 3 calves scattered across the pasture. I heard one of the workers yell, "Whoa, watch it." Patricia turned around annoyed, but not because my fence got destroyed. Because it slowed down her project. Big difference. I walked over to the damaged fence slowly while the truck driver climbed out looking nervous. "Sorry, sir," he said. "They told us this was HOA. Property access. HOA property access. Not private ranch land." Somebody had trained these crews to think Ridgeview controlled everything around them. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Fence damage. Tire tracks. Utility paint markings. License plates. Every single thing. Patricia noticed immediately. "Oh please," she scoffed. "You are documenting tire tracks now." I looked at her calmly. "My father documented everything." "Well, your father is not here anymore." The second she said it, the air changed. Even the workers went quiet. Patricia realized she crossed a line, but instead of backing off, she doubled down like people usually do when they are used to winning arguments by force. "This expansion is happening whether you cooperate or not," she said coldly. "And if you interfere with county-approved access, Ridgeview will seek legal remedies." Legal remedies. Fancy words again. Funny how rich people always threaten lawsuits the way normal people threaten parking tickets. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. "You should really stop using that road until this gets sorted out." Patricia laughed. "Or what?" I looked past her toward the canyon entrance where every delivery truck, school bus, emergency vehicle, and construction crew entered Ridgeview Estates. One road in, one road out. Then I looked back at her. Or somebody is eventually going to discover they built a very expensive neighborhood with only one front door. Patricia smirked like she thought I was bluffing. That was her mistake. Loud people usually think calm people are weak right up until the moment paperwork proves otherwise. Things got ugly after the construction crews showed up. Not loud ugly at first. Quiet ugly. The kind that creeps across your land inch by inch until one morning you realize somebody else has started acting like they own your life. Ridgeview traffic doubled within 2 weeks. Cement trucks rattled through my canyon before sunrise. Landscaping trailers tore up the gravel shoulders my father spent years maintaining. Delivery vans started using my cattle turnaround as a parking area during lunch breaks. One guy actually dumped fast food trash into my creek like it was a public drainage ditch. I picked up 3 soda cups, 2 beer cans, and a diaper one afternoon while standing in water my grandfather used to drink from barehanded. That was the day I stopped thinking of Ridgeview as careless. Careless people apologize when they make mistakes. These people acted entitled. Big difference. Patricia, meanwhile, started turning the whole county against me, one smiling conversation at a time. I noticed it first at Miller's grocery in town. Old Mrs. Doherty, who had known my family for 30 years, suddenly gave me this uncomfortable little nod instead of saying hello. Then the cashier asked if I was really trying to shut down access for all those families. That caught my attention. Patricia was talking. A lot. By the end of the month, everybody in town had heard some version of the same story. Levi Jennings was trying to block emergency access to Ridgeview because he wanted money from the HOA. Funny thing about rumors. The people spreading them are usually hiding something bigger. Then came the letters. Certified envelopes with Ridgeview Estates Community Association stamped across the front like they were the federal government. The first one claimed I was interfering with community infrastructure development. The second accused me of creating unsafe conditions by parking ranch equipment near shared access corridors. Shared access corridors. There were those fake developer words again. My favorite part? One letter included a warning that legal action could follow if I continued hostile obstruction activities. Hostile obstruction activities apparently meant owning my own land. I spread those letters across my kitchen table beside my father's old property maps and just stared at them for a while. You ever notice how bullies always create paperwork once yelling stops working? Here is the scary part, though. The letters almost worked. Not legally. Emotionally. Because when enough people repeat a lie confidently, part of your brain starts wondering if maybe you really are the problem. That is why documentation matters so much. Facts pull you back to reality. So instead of arguing, I started recording everything. Every truck entering the property. Every damaged fence post. Every construction crew crossing beyond the easement line. I mounted trail cameras near the creek crossings and hidden cameras near the eastern pasture gate. Most people think revenge stories are about anger. They are not. Real power comes from patience. Patricia, on the other hand, got bolder every day. One afternoon, I came home from town and found half a dozen HOA board members walking through my lower pasture wearing matching Ridgeview polo shirts like they were on a golf outing. One woman was taking pictures of my equipment barn. Another guy was measuring the creek bank with a tape measure. Patricia stood in the middle of them, all pointing around like a tour guide. This area would be ideal for future Greenbelt integration, she announced. Greenbelt integration. Lady was planning parks on land she did not own. I walked up slowly while my cattle watched from behind the fence. Can I help you folks? Patricia smiled without even looking embarrassed. Community inspection tour. Of my ranch. Of the surrounding infrastructure area. I swear these people could not speak normal English if their lives depended on it. One of the board members, some nervous guy named Alan with sweat stains under his arms, leaned closer to Patricia and whispered something. I caught one sentence. Maybe we should wait for legal review first. Patricia shut him down immediately. We are completely protected. Protected. That word stayed with me. Not right. Not legal. Protected. Like somebody had promised her she would never face consequences. Then she did something that finally made my temper flare. She pointed toward my mother's old garden near the creek and said, that would actually make a beautiful picnic area for residents. My mother planted that garden herself before she got sick. Wildflowers, lavender, old stone borders my father built by hand. Hearing Patricia talk about turning it into HOA property made something cold settle into my chest. I stepped closer until we were standing face to face. You need to leave. Her smile disappeared. Excuse me. This ranch. My fences. My creek. My road. You keep acting like it belongs to Ridgeview. The whole group went quiet. Patricia folded her arms. You are isolating yourself, Levi. The county supports this development. The Planning Commission supports this development. The homeowners support this development. I nodded slowly. Maybe. Then I pointed toward the canyon road behind them. But all of you are still driving through my property to get home tonight. Silence again. Tiny silence. But important. Because for the first time, some of the HOA board members started looking around differently. Not like tourists anymore. Like people suddenly realizing they might be standing in the middle of a legal problem big enough to swallow an entire subdivision. About a week after Patricia turned my ranch into her personal HOA field trip, I stopped arguing with people completely. That surprised everybody. The county planning office expected me to file complaints. Patricia clearly expected screaming matches. Ridgeview residents expected some dramatic standoff at the front gate. Instead, I went quiet. Real quiet. And that made people nervous. See, loud fights are easy. Everybody knows who the villain is supposed to be. But silence. Silence makes people wonder what you know that they do not. Every morning I drove into town, drank burnt coffee at the same diner, nodded politely at people whispering about me, and then spent the rest of the day digging through records, county maps, survey archives, easement filings, utility permits. My father used to joke that most land wars are won by whoever can survive the longest inside a dusty records room. Turns out he was right. The county records building sat behind the courthouse in a squat brick structure that smelled like old paper and radiator heat. The archive basement looked like something frozen in 1974. Metal shelves, flickering lights, boxes stacked all the way to the ceiling. The clerk downstairs was an older woman named Marlene who had worked there longer than anybody could remember. First day I walked in, she looked over her glasses and said, "You are the ranch boy fighting with Ridgeview, right?" "Apparently," I answered. She snorted. "That woman has been stomping through this building for months acting like she owns the county." Interesting choice of words. Months. Patricia had been preparing something long before I came home. That thought stayed in my head while I started pulling old plat maps from storage. Most people would not understand what they were looking at. To them, it is just lines on paper. But to engineers and surveyors, maps tell stories. And the Ridgeview story started looking stranger the deeper I dug. The original easement records dated back to 1968. Temporary county emergency access route. Limited width. Conditional renewal required every 10 years. I read that sentence 3 times. Conditional renewal required. My stomach tightened immediately. Because if the easement had expired without renewal, then Ridgeview was operating on borrowed ground the entire time. "Marlene," I called out, "where are the renewal filings after 1989? She frowned from behind the desk. "Should be in utility extensions." We searched for almost an hour. Nothing. No renewal. No permanent transfer. No county acquisition. Nothing. That should have been impossible. You do not build a 200-home subdivision without verifying legal access. At least not if competent people are involved. Then Marlene found something even stranger buried inside an unrelated drainage file. A county engineering memo from 6 years earlier. I still remember the exact sentence because it made the hair stand up on my arms. Existing ranch access route appears privately maintained beyond recorded easement boundary. Recommend legal clarification before future expansion approval. Legal clarification before future expansion approval. Somebody had already raised the alarm years ago, and somebody ignored it. Marlene looked at me over the paperwork slowly. "Oh boy." "Exactly. Oh boy." That was the moment the whole thing stopped looking like HOA arrogance and started looking like deliberate deception. Somebody knew there was a problem with that road. The question was who. I spent the next 3 days tracing signatures through county files like a detective following footprints. Planning approvals. Environmental reviews. Utility permits. Every document eventually led back to the same. Names. Patricia Thornwell. Ridgeview Estates Community Association. A law firm out of Cheyenne called Grayson and Pike. And then I found the email. Not officially. Somebody had accidentally attached it to a public zoning packet. Most people would have skipped right past it. I almost did too. Subject line, access concerns. Sent 4 years earlier from a junior attorney at Grayson and Pike. The email said future expansion may create dependency risk if permanent roadway acquisition is not secured before Phase 2 development. Dependency risk. Lawyer language for this entire neighborhood could have a serious legal problem later. Patricia had known. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to understand the road was not fully protected. Enough to keep pushing development anyway. Enough to start acting nervous every time I mentioned ownership. I leaned back in that dusty basement chair and laughed quietly to myself. Not because it was funny, because the entire thing suddenly made perfect sense. Patricia was not trying to bully me off the land. She was trying to scare me away from looking too closely at paperwork she hoped nobody would ever read. Big difference. That night, as I drove home through the canyon, Ridgeview lights glowed across the hills like a tiny city balanced on borrowed assumptions. Families eating dinner. Kids riding bikes. Porch lights shining peacefully. Most of those people had no idea their expensive homes depended on a road their HOA might not legally control. And for the first time since this whole mess started, I realized something important. Patricia was not the only one trapped by that road anymore. The entire subdivision was. Most people think the smart move would have been shutting the road down immediately after I found those records. Honestly, part of me wanted to. There were nights I stood out by the canyon gates staring at Ridgeview lights glowing across the hills, and imagined how fast Patricia's confidence would disappear if I chained the whole road shut right then and there. But anger is expensive. Patience pays better. So I did the opposite of what everybody expected. I let them keep using the road. Every truck, every HOA vehicle, every contractor, every moving van hauling granite countertops into Phase 2 model homes. I let all of it continue while quietly building the kind of case that destroys people in slow motion. First thing I did was hire a surveyor named Hank Barlow. Old Wyoming guy, 70 years old. Looked like he had been carved out of tree bark and diesel fuel. Hank carried a metal thermos full of black coffee and talked less than anybody I had ever met. I liked him immediately. We spent 3 full days walking the canyon road with old county maps spread across the hood of my truck. Hank measured fence lines, culverts, utility crossings, and original survey pins buried under dirt and weeds. Around noon on the second day, he stopped near the lower turnout and kicked at a half-buried steel marker sticking out of the ground. "Well now," he muttered. "That is interesting." I crouched beside him. Somebody had moved the original easement pin almost 22 feet east toward my property line. Not naturally either. The concrete base had tool marks all over it. Somebody physically relocated a legal boundary marker. That is not a paperwork mistake anymore. That is fraud territory. Hank whistled softly through his teeth. "Boy," he said, "if this goes to court, somebody is going to have a real bad week." That was exactly what I was counting on. Meanwhile, Patricia kept escalating. Ridgeview announced Phase 2 officially 2 weeks later with banners hanging across the subdivision entrance. Coming soon. Luxury Canyon Estates. Starting at $800,000. They even held a little outdoor celebration with catered barbecue and a live country band. I watched the whole thing from the ridge above my property through binoculars while construction crews drove across my land every 10 minutes. Patricia stood near the model homes smiling for real estate photos like she was running for governor. The crazy part? She looked relaxed. Too relaxed. That told me she still believed I was bluffing. Good. Nothing more dangerous than an overconfident person standing on weak paperwork. Around that same time, the lawsuit arrived. Thick envelope. Fancy attorney letterhead. Ridgeview Estates. Community Association versus Levi Jennings. The HOA wanted permanent access rights, damages for development delays, and a court order preventing me from interfering with critical residential infrastructure. Reading it almost made me laugh. They were suing me for controlling my own property. But buried inside the lawsuit was the part that really mattered. Ridgeview officially admitted in court filings that the road was essential infrastructure for current and future development. Essential infrastructure. That phrase was gold. Because every additional home they approved after acknowledging access dependency increased their liability if the road issue exploded later. Patricia had gotten greedy. Instead of slowing down once questions started appearing, she accelerated construction. Big mistake. You never build faster on top of unstable ground. I hired an attorney named Rebecca Sloan out of Casper. Sharp woman. Spoke like a schoolteacher, but fought like a chainsaw. First meeting, I spread every document across her conference table. Easement records, survey maps, the engineering memo, the misplaced survey pin photos, the lawsuit. Rebecca stayed quiet for almost 10 minutes flipping through everything. Then she leaned back slowly. "Levi," she said carefully, "do you understand how bad this could get for them?" "I have a feeling." "No," she replied. "I mean really bad. If they knowingly expanded development without securing permanent legal access, homeowners could sue the HOA board personally." Personally. That word mattered. Corporations are brave. Individuals get scared real fast. Rebecca pointed at the lawsuit filing. And Patricia just handed us something beautiful. "What?" "Dependency." She tapped the page with her pen. "They admitted the entire subdivision depends on your road." I drove home that night feeling calmer than I had in months. Not happy. Calm. Huge difference. Calm means the facts are finally stronger than the lies. Over the next few weeks, I turned into the most boring man in Wyoming. I documented everything. Time-stamped videos, drone footage, vehicle counts, property damage estimates, utility trench locations, every contractor crossing my land, signed into a spreadsheet. Every HOA truck got photographed. Every conversation got recorded legally. Patricia probably thought I was doing nothing because I stopped arguing publicly. But silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes silence means somebody is building a trap carefully enough that you never see the door close until it locks. Then came the moment I knew Patricia was starting to panic. One evening, just before sunset, I found her standing alone near the canyon road looking at the old easement markers. No sunglasses. No fake smile. No HOA entourage. Just Patricia staring at the ground like it had personally betrayed her. She did not hear me walk up behind her. "Beautiful evening," I said. She jumped hard enough to nearly lose balance. That told me everything. Calm people do not startle like that. Patricia looked exhausted for the first time since I met her. "You are really going through with this," she said quietly. Going through with what? Trying to destroy Ridgeview. There it was again. That strategy. Pretend protecting private property is the same thing as attacking innocent families. I looked down at the original survey pin beside her boot. "Patricia," I said calmly, "I am not the one who built 200 homes on a legal question mark." She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Because deep down, she already knew I was right. The county hearing happened on a Thursday morning, and by sunrise the courthouse parking lot already looked like the county fair. Ridgeview residents packed the sidewalks carrying coffee cups and folding chairs like they were waiting for a parade. News vans from Casper and Cheyenne lined the street because somehow the story had escaped the county line and turned into public entertainment. Rich HOA versus stubborn ranch owner. Most people still thought that was the whole story. They had no idea what was about to happen inside that courtroom. I parked my old truck beside the sheriff department vehicles and walked toward the courthouse carrying 2 banker boxes full of records. No fancy suit. No dramatic entrance. Just jeans, boots, and 40 years of my family's paperwork. Patricia arrived 10 minutes later in a black SUV with her attorney and 3 HOA board members following behind her like nervous interns. She wore navy blue this time instead of white, probably trying to look serious and respectable in front of the judge. But the second she saw the boxes in my hands, her confidence flickered again. Tiny crack. Same one I had been seeing for weeks. Rebecca Sloan met me near the courthouse steps holding a legal pad and coffee. "Ready?" she asked. "As I will ever be." She nodded toward Patricia. "She still thinks this is about negotiating access rights." And Rebecca smiled slowly. "It stopped being about access the moment we proved they knew." That sentence stayed in my head as we walked into the courtroom. Because she was right. This was never just a land dispute anymore. This was about deception. The hearing started simple enough. Patricia's attorney stood first and painted me as some angry ranch owner trying to punish innocent families over a technicality. He used words like unreasonable obstruction and anti-development behavior. At one point, he actually called the road dispute a minor documentation issue. Minor documentation issue. Amazing how people talk when the paperwork hurts them instead of helping them. Patricia sat beside him, nodding confidently, while Ridgeview residents watched from the gallery. Some glared at me like I personally caused traffic jams and power outages. Others just looked nervous, especially the homeowners who bought into Phase 2 recently. Rebecca let the HOA lawyer talk for almost 40 minutes without interrupting once. Another smart move. Never stop somebody while they are digging their own hole deeper. Then the judge turned toward our table. "Ms. Sloan." Rebecca stood calmly. "Your Honor, Ridgeview Estates has spent months describing this case as a disagreement over road usage. It is not." She placed one thin folder in front of the judge. "This is a disclosure case." The room got quiet immediately. Disclosure case sounds expensive. Rebecca continued. The HOA board expanded residential development while knowingly relying on access rights they could not legally verify. Patricia shifted in her seat hard enough that I heard the chair squeak from across the courtroom. Her attorney jumped up immediately. "Objection. Speculation." Rebecca did not even look at him. She handed another document to the bailiff. "Then perhaps the court would like to review internal correspondence from Grayson and Pike advising Ridgeview leadership of unresolved dependency risk tied to the roadway easement." Boom. You could actually feel the room change. Like oxygen leaving the air. Patricia's attorney grabbed the document so fast he nearly knocked over his water glass. The judge adjusted his glasses and started reading silently. Meanwhile, the courtroom behind us began whispering. Dependency risk. Unresolved easement. HOA leadership advised. Those are not words homeowners want hearing attached to their $600,000 mortgages. Patricia leaned toward her lawyer, whispering furiously while he flipped pages faster and faster. Rebecca stayed calm. That was the beautiful part. Calm wins. Loud people panic when documents start speaking for themselves. Then Rebecca called Hank Barlow to testify. Watching old Hank explain survey pins to a room full of confused HOA residents was honestly incredible. He walked the judge through every measurement slowly and carefully like he was teaching a middle school math class. Original easement line. Relocated marker. Missing renewal filings. Encroachment distances. By the end, even the judge looked irritated. Mr. Barlow, he asked finally, in your professional opinion, was the original easement boundary altered? Hank took one sip from his thermos before answering. Yes, sir. Accidentally. Hank looked toward Patricia for about 2 full seconds. No, sir. Absolute silence. One woman in the gallery actually whispered, "Oh my God." Patricia's attorney tried recovering after that. He argued implied access rights, community necessity, historical use. But the energy was gone. Everybody could feel it. The case had shifted underneath their feet. Then Rebecca delivered the final blow. She projected drone footage of Ridgeview Phase 2 construction directly onto the courtroom screen. New foundations, utility trenches, framing crews, hundreds of thousands of dollars in ongoing. Development tied entirely to one road. My road. Your Honor, Rebecca said calmly. Ridgeview Estates' continued expansion after discovering unresolved legal access exposure. Not only did they continue construction, they marketed those properties as secure long-term residential investments. The judge leaned back slowly. Are you alleging the HOA knowingly exposed homeowners to legal and financial risk? Rebecca nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. Patricia stood up, so suddenly her chair slammed backward. That is ridiculous, she snapped. We acted in the community's best interest. The judge looked at her sharply. Sit down, Miss Thornwell. She sat. Barely. Then came the moment that truly ended her. The county engineer took the stand. Same nervous guy from the stormy night in the ambulance scene. Same guy who looked terrified every time easements came up. Rebecca asked him one question. Did your office previously recommend legal clarification before Phase 2 expansion approval? The engineer swallowed hard. Yes. Was that clarification completed? Long pause. The kind that changes lives. No. The courtroom exploded into whispers. HOA residents turned toward Patricia immediately. One man stood up halfway out of his seat yelling, "You told us everything was approved." Another shouted, "Our realtor said permanent access was guaranteed." Patricia looked around like somebody trapped under collapsing ice. For the first time since I met her, she had no script left. The judge did not issue his ruling that day. Honestly, he did not need to. The second those internal emails hit the courtroom screen, Ridgeview already started collapsing from the inside. By the time Rebecca and I walked out of the courthouse, homeowners were surrounding Patricia in the parking lot demanding answers. Not yelling at me anymore. Yelling at her. Huge difference. One man in a business suit pointed straight at the HOA board screaming, "You told us the access rights were permanent." A woman holding a baby asked if emergency services could still reach the subdivision legally. Another homeowner wanted to know why Phase 2 lots were still being sold if the road situation was unresolved. Patricia tried controlling the crowd at first. Everybody needs to calm down, she kept saying. Our legal team is handling this. But nobody believed her anymore. Once trust breaks, it breaks fast, especially when money is involved. I stood beside my truck watching the whole thing quietly while reporters shoved microphones toward anybody willing to talk. Rebecca leaned against the tailgate drinking courthouse coffee that tasted like boiled dirt. You know what the funny part is? She said. What? The road problem is not even the worst thing for them now. She was right. Because once homeowners realized the HOA board knew about the legal risk ahead of time, the lawsuits started multiplying like rabbits. Within 2 weeks, Ridgeview residents filed complaints against the HOA board for non-disclosure. The county froze all Phase 2 permits pending legal review. Contractors stopped showing up. Half-finished luxury homes sat empty in the Wyoming wind wrapped in loose plastic and unpaid invoices. Then the banks got nervous. That is when things really turned ugly for Patricia. Banks hate uncertainty more than anything. Once lenders realized the subdivision depended on disputed access rights, financing dried up almost overnight. Property values inside Ridgeview dropped fast. Realtors stopped advertising secure, gated luxury living and started using phrases like pending infrastructure clarification. That is rich person language for panic. Meanwhile, I still had not closed the road. That surprised people. Even Deputy Collins pulled me aside outside the diner one morning. Honestly, Levi, he admitted, most folks expected you to lock the gate the second you won. I stirred cream into my coffee and shrugged. Family still lived there. That mattered to me. Most Ridgeview residents were not villains. A lot of them were regular people who trusted the wrong HOA board and signed paperwork they did not fully understand. They bought homes, not legal battles. So instead of shutting them out completely, Rebecca helped me draft a temporary access agreement. Emergency vehicles, school buses, residents, and utility crews could still use the road under written conditions. No commercial expansion traffic. No new development equipment. No HOA authority beyond the original easement corridor. And most important of all, Ridgeview officially acknowledged in writing that the roadway crossed private Jennings family property. That line alone probably made my father smile somewhere. Patricia refused to sign the agreement at first. Pride. Pride destroys more people than greed ever will. But after 3 more emergency hearings and a mountain of homeowner complaints, the HOA board voted against her publicly. I will never forget that meeting. Packed clubhouse. Folding chairs full of angry residents. Patricia standing at the front trying to defend herself while her own board members stared at the floor. Then Alan, the sweaty, nervous board member from earlier, finally stood up and cleared his throat. The board moves to accept the Jennings access agreement and remove Patricia Thornwell as acting HOA president pending investigation. Absolute silence. Patricia looked at him like he had just stabbed her in the back. You coward, she whispered. Alan swallowed hard. You told us the road issue was resolved. Patricia tried speaking again, but nobody listened anymore. One by one, homeowners started walking out of the meeting while she stood there alone beside the projector screen she used to control everybody with. Funny how fast power disappears once paperwork catches up with lies. About 6 months later, Ridgeview looked completely different. The giant Phase 2 banners were gone. Construction equipment disappeared. The county converted part of the subdivision into a managed road district separate from the HOA. The Thornwell lawsuit mess dragged through court for another year, but Patricia herself vanished almost immediately after resigning. Last rumor I heard, she moved to Arizona, probably somewhere with another homeowners association. Some people never learn. As for me, life finally got quiet again. Real quiet. The kind my father used to love. One cold October morning, I stood beside the canyon gate watching the school bus roll slowly down the gravel road while frost covered the pasture grass silver and white. The new sign beside the entrance read private road. Access by written agreement only. Simple. Honest. Accurate. That road was never really about asphalt or easements or lawsuits. It was about boundaries. About people believing confidence matters more than ownership. About how easy it is for loud people to convince everybody else they are right. But paper lasts longer than arrogance. That is the thing Patricia never understood. Intimidation works for a little while. Documentation works forever.